Insomnia. Someone we'll call Reese once told me that there was a reason for everything. No matter what happened to me, it was all part of a grand scheme of things. I've only ever heard people say that about bad things. And in my particular case, the bad thing was insomnia. For months, I had either not slept or hardly slept at all. I would spend the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, and would fall asleep in class and lag behind in everything I did. Then, one day, I began to grow comfortable in the dark and solace of the night. One night, I was lying in bed when I heard the door open. Thinking it was my mother or father, I slowly turned to greet them. When I saw Reese stumble and fall through the door, his clothing were ragged and his face was cut and bleeding. I quickly got out of bed and rushed over to him, helping him off of the ground and into my bed. He was badly injured, sputtering through blood as he tried to speak. He grabbed my collar and pulled me close. Spitlets of blood cascade into my face with every word. You need to wake up. My eyes suddenly jolted open, my world spinning. I was no longer in my bedroom, but in the middle of the woods in the dark. In front of me was Reese, bleeding, propped up against a tree. In my hand was a knife, slowly dripping and glistening in the moonlight. I felt the cold breath on the back of my neck and turned around. The shadow touched my shoulder, turning me back around. I knew what needed to be done. I accepted it, and I closed my eyes. The drain. I feel the soft patter of water on my head. I look up at the small holes that project the only light I can see. Water is coming through, raining on me. It feels wonderful. The water isn't clean, though. It contains all of the dirt and sweat from your busy day. I stick my tongue out, tasting it. Then comes my favorite part. You clean your hair. And some pieces come out. They travel through the holes, landing next to me. I scrape them up, moving to put them with the rest. I have a large collection of them. I've been collecting them since you were young. I have enough now to make a wig out of them. The water ceases, and you leave the view of my holes. I place your hair on my head, strands falling on my face. I inhale deeply, smelling you. I can only wait until you shower again, so I can show you my hair. The guy in room 302. It's the summer, and you're out of college classes for at least a week or two before the next semester starts. You've spent this time lounging around and sleeping a lot, but lately, correspondence between your local friends has dropped off. They don't drop by, your phone's been quiet for a while, and your IM lists are all empty. After 5 days of this, you've gotten bored enough to try chat rooms. They're all empty. Even the big ones. Any emails you send get no replies. When you leave your apartment, the whole building is unearthly silent. The only noise that comes out of all of it is the whir from the automated rail outside. Nobody answers when you knock. All the buildings are dark and locked up when you look out the window. The only cars are of the parked variety. A search of the entire building, and even further beyond that, yields nothing. No life. The only movement is from the wind or the automated pieces of machinery. Defeated, you sink back into an empty apartment complex. On your door is pinned a note. Turns out the guy in 302 could really sleep through the end of the world. The note is dated 5 days Children of the Moon by Rad Lad. In the town of Biston, nobody leaves their home after dark. As soon as the sun begins to set, shutters are drawn shut, candles are snuffed out, and doors are locked tight. Before the moon is fully risen, the entire town appears deserted, and silence reigns supreme.
Did you hear that?
Whispered Freya, sounding very small and afraid in the dark. Shut up! Her older brother, Frood, hissed through clenched teeth as he eyed the black windows of the house nearest to them. They were probably locked. Nobody in their right mind would leave their windows unlocked at night. Not in Biston, anyway.
I told you we shouldn't play in the forest.
Continued Freya.
And I said we should go back sooner.
And I said shut up, Frood went on. Whining about the past doesn't change the present. Frood looked at his sister, shivering in the dark. It doesn't change the situation we're in. Before Freya could respond, the faint sound of child laughter floated across the wind. Goosebumps erupted along Frood's neck and arms. Something about the sound seemed wrong.
Maybe there's other...
Frood clasped his hands over Freya's mouth, pulling her in close. He shrank back into the shadows of the alley again. The unearthly sound drifted across the air. Freya tensed in Frood's arms as she realized the magnitude of their situation. A child's voice, oddly distorted, broke the silence of the night like a fist through glass.
Come out, wherever you are.
The thing lumbered across the mouth of the alley, just a few feet from Frood and Freya's hiding place. It was roughly the size of a child, yet shuffled with its arms hanging grotesquely close to the ground, making its disproportionate body appear markedly ape-like. It was completely nude, and had skin so shockingly white that it reflected the glow from the moon. The thing turned its shimmering bald head towards the alley as it crossed. Its face was perfectly smooth and entirely devoid of feature, save for an impossibly wide smile, with thin lips the color of blood. The crimson slash of its mouth appeared to stretch from ear to ear. Frood felt warmth spread down his thigh as his bladder let go. Freya whimpered. The thing froze mid-stride, its body becoming as rigid as stone. Slowly, it turned its torso until it faced the alleyway. It took a tentative step forward. Freya sucked in a sharp breath through her nose as she began to hyperventilate. Frood clamped his hands over her mouth, but he was too late. Impossibly fast, the thing twisted its head towards their hiding place, producing a sickening crackle from its neck.
Found you.
In the town of Biston, nobody leaves their house after dark. Every day, young ones are sternly told to be home by dusk. They are told the evil that haunts the streets at night. They are told to always remain silent because if they hear you, the children of the night will tear you limb from limb. My parents were hiding in the basement. Now when I think back to the excuses my parents used to make, I feel like an idiot. I remember being 12 years old, standing at the top of the staircase and watching all the people filling into our basement. Some men wore white masks and some women wore bonnets, but they all had small suitcases, as though there was a bus stop beneath our house, and every one of them looked pale, frightened. My mother would catch me watching from above and send me to bed, but not before I could ask what was happening. We're just going to talk about grown-up things, baby. Her voice was sweet and high-pitched. She always sounded happy regardless of how concerned she looked. One day you'll join us too. For right now, you should get some sleep. But I didn't sleep. I never could with the images of those people, blanched faces in my mind, men and women alike, all terrified. I would lie awake in bed with my ears pressed to the mattress, covering the other side of my head with a pillow. From inside my shell, the heavy thudding from below was transformed into sounds of marshmallows bouncing around. The screams that would follow were instead turned into a murmuring kind of one-note melody. One after another, the unique notes of each person would resound and then die away. My entire childhood consisted of this nightly succession of muffled marshmallows and melodies coming from the invisible bus stop in the basement. And then reality hit. Literally. One day, Manuel came up to me at school and pushed me hard against the lockers. He punched me in the stomach twice before he even said a word. Only when he saw that the teachers were forcing their way through the crowded hall did he ask me, "Why is my mother at your house?" What? I neither knew what his mother looked like nor where she had been. It was such a weird question, but something inside of me twisted at the thought of people coming in. I pictured what his mother might look like, her caramel Latina skin looking pale from the terror that would inevitably seize her, because it seized them all. I'm sorry, I said. My dad just sits in his room and cries, he bellowed in my face. He punched me again, this time in the face. The teachers were upon us, restraining him. Where is she? He yelled as he was dragged away. I know she's there. Tell me she's there. I apologized again. Please just tell me she's there. His voice was breaking now. He sounded like he was tearing up a little. Isn't she? Is that where she is? Her name is Gloria, please. Is she okay? Is she? He couldn't hold it back any longer. The teachers gave him enough room to move, and he instantly pushed his hands over his face, hiding the tears that were coming now. 3 years passed. I had started getting a reputation. At least I'm guessing that's what had happened, because people completely stopped trying to talk to me as soon as I was in high school. Mother explained that people just turn into bad people the older they get. She said that's why, when they get to be full-grown adults, they come to our house and try to fix things. I was just about to ask her again what goes on in the basement, but I stopped myself. I was developing a plan now to infiltrate the basement and finally see for myself. I knew all my parents would say is, "You're not old enough." It's always made me feel like I was still a little child, the way they said it, but I was starting to resist. I was starting to crave that feeling that I saw all of those other kids at school expressing. They looked so mature, so grown up. I felt somehow that the only way to get in there would be to sneak into the basement while my parents went to the grocery store. Only recently had I found where my dad hid the keys to the basement door that was locked from the outside. I had stumbled onto the secret drawer in the kitchen when I was looking for a potato peeler. I noticed it had to be the key because it had a weird engraving that was identical to the tattoo that some of the strangers would have on their backs and their hands. It looked like a snake that was eating its own tail. As soon as the front door swung shut behind them, I launched down the stairs and took up the key. I had expected to need a lot of time to rummage around the basement and see what was going on down there, but I expected wrong. The minute I swung the basement door open, I was overcome with a strong, foul smell that I knew could only be the smell of death. There was no light switch on the wall, but I found a flashlight hanging on a peg instead. I flipped the beam on and slowly waded through the stench. Down the steps, where the air got colder and colder, I could hear a low sound of moaning echoing through the subterranean passage. At the base of the stairs, there was only cold concrete and bare, steel-looking walls enclosing everything. I stepped on something squishy and lunged forward away as it spoke. Am I forgiven? The flashlight beam knifed into an emaciated, poor-looking woman with shackles chaining her feet to the floor. Her eyes refracted a silvery kind of liquid, as though she had contracted in both of her eyes. I said nothing and staggered further until I saw a low red light glowing around the corner. A hearth was glowing hot at the very end of the basement. It was there that my flashlight fell upon something I could never have imagined. A man, just as withered as the woman chained behind me, was pulling a poker out of the hearth. It was a steel rod with the sign of a serpent at the end glowing red hot. Forgive me, he whispered to no one. He drove the burning end into his stomach, where it sizzled like water in a grease pan. As he did, he let out a scream that matched those I heard that night. Everything was collapsing on top of me. It was here that they brought their suitcase to stay. This was where they congregated and did what? I couldn't even fathom. A wave of nausea overcame me. I wobbled, almost toppling over myself before dropping my flashlight and resting my hands on my knees. It was all I could do to keep from vomiting everywhere. As I hunkered down, I noticed a small pool of blood that trailed off to the right. I regained myself as best as I could and followed it off to the right of the room. There was a closet, and as I drew near, the smell of death and decay became the most unbearable. I reached my hand out to the closet, but something stopped me. Someone else, much stronger, had seized my wrist, spun around to find my father staring gravely down at me, his face lit from the feeble glow of the hearth. "You don't want to see what's in there," he said. He smiled at me, a little mysteriously. He seemed so natural in the midst of this chamber of death. "What is this place?" I asked. "This place?" he said, reaching down to my ankles and latching something metal around me. "Is your new home for the next 2 years. Apparently you're ready to be an adult, just like the others. You've proven that by disobeying me, so now you too must find forgiveness." I knew I could not resist. Still, I had too many questions. All of those childhood uncertainties were culminating into this absurd place that reeked of death. I asked him again for a straight answer, as he took his time attaching my shackles to a bolt shared by a corpse that was laying decaying on the floor. "This is hell," he simply said. "The knowledge has been handed down to us that God no longer has his patience to forgive those who sin against him. On earth, man runs rampant like a disease. It's only now through the suffering of our physical bodies that we may repent. It is only through serving in hell on earth that we may purge from eternal fire and death. Atonement must be made." A million objections sprang from my mind, but somehow a part of me could not resist. A part of me felt that this must be, if only because it came from my father. A part of me knew I deserved this, and longed to be nearer the hearth so I could burn the apology into my skin. But I wasn't as lucky as that man who died 2 months later and was taken to the closet inside of the room with the rest of the bodies. No, I was shackled up next to the withered woman named Gloria, who seemed clueless when I told her that her son was looking for her. "I am a sinner," was all she said. "I must find forgiveness." Darkness in the rearview mirror. Unknown author. I've always been uneasy driving alone at night. It was worse the first few times when I had just gotten my license, but the nagging fear has never gone away to this day. It's disorienting to look into the mirrors and see nothing. I mean nothing but the consuming blackness of the night. It makes me hesitant to check the mirror should I see this dark void or, worse, something sitting in my back seat staring at me. In the summer of 2013, I'd found myself driving home alone on Highway 902 from a party. It was almost midnight, and needless to say, it was pitch black. As was usual at night, I was on edge. I had the radio off. I could hear nothing but the muffled roar of tires on the pavement and the dull hum of the engine. I stole a glance into the middle rearview mirror and saw nothing but darkness through the black window. I know that I looked backwards and saw nothing. I'm sure of it. Just the seeming endless blackness of the night. I remember it so clearly because not 10 seconds later, a car passed me to the left, headlights on. I had one of those sudden adrenaline rushes, like when you think you see a person outside your bedroom window when you just see a tree, or when you start to wake up at night when you feel like you're falling. 10 seconds earlier, nothing had been behind me. Suddenly, a car. I drove all the way home shivering, knowing something was off. The next morning, I found 2 sets of scratches near the back of my van. One was on the left rear and one was on the right. The car was pretty old. They could have been there for months, but that was the first time I distinctively remember seeing them. In hindsight, there are 2 possibilities for what happened that night. Possibility 1, by some glitch in reality or something paranormal, this other car had somehow appeared behind me within 10 seconds of me checking my mirror, like some weird ghost crap or something. However, the second option is what makes my blood run cold whenever I consider it. It didn't even occur to me until months after the fact, but it makes me dread driving alone at night even more. Possibility 2, the car was normal. It had approached me from the rear and passed me to my left. However, something large and wide and was black as the night had been clinging to the rear of my car, obscuring my view through the window and leaving deep scratches on the sides. And I had inadvertently driven it home with me. A man in the doorway. True story time. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I liked sleeping in her bed whenever I was staying with her.
Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of the hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer, and my mom had a window open in her bedroom that was directly behind the bed, above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the door frame of my mom's room. Her door was open and could partially see into my room. It was strange because our cat was a huge snuggler and was typically always in the bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned my face to my mom to wake her up, and the 3 to 4 seconds it took to wake her up and asked me what was wrong, we both looked back at the door frame, and there was a man standing in my open doorway, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out the window. Again, we were on the first floor, and it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed, and we were able to start screaming for help, and someone called 911. The police came, but didn't see any signs of forced entry, only that our front door was unlocked, which led to them believing the man must have exited that way. But the strange thing was that my mom swore up and down she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. Insane lady found their house. A terrifying but true story I experienced when I was 12. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area, except for the family my dad was friends with. Single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a couple years older than me, 12 at the time I met her. We got to know each other a little over a couple years. We weren't close, but ended up having the same friends. One night, my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother has been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they got a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom. She knocks a certain way when coming in and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in, and this is where I don't know the details. I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitating her and left her body naked in the bathtub. Hit her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. Grandma stalker. This happened to my wife's grandmother about 15 years ago while we were still dating. Her husband had just passed away about a year previously, but she'd been going down to the library and volunteering, exercise, and socializing. This was in the winter, so her walk back was while it was getting dark. The library closed at 5, and then there was some extra stuff to do before everyone actually left. And on this particular night, she turned down a ride from another volunteer because, damn it, she needed to stay in shape. The house is about a mile away through some lightly wooded areas in South Texas, and she was about halfway home. She noticed someone behind her. He's walking the same direction and gaining on her, which in itself isn't all that particular. She's old and thus not particularly fast, but in this case he seemed vaguely sinister. They keep walking. Pretty soon he's right behind her. Then he falls into pace, just staying behind her. Now she knows that something's up, but she's almost home. She can see the top of her driveway coming up, and she leaves her lights on, so it looks like someone's home when she's walking in. She just needs to make it another 150 yards, then 100. All that time, she said he was so close she could feel his breath on her neck. Maybe 50 yards, it happened. A strong head on her shoulders, the man said.
Okay, bitch, turn around and hand over your purse or I'll fucking cut you.
She stops for a second, then takes one big step forward, turns and shoots the guy in the neck with the .38 she kept in her purse. Hey, it's Texas. The guy spent the next 5 years in a prison hospital before he died of complications. My wife's grandmother passed last year. Up to the end, she lamented that she'd pulled the trigger too soon. My late husband would have been embarrassed to know I missed.
The Asylum. Unknown author. Far beyond the reaches of our earth, amongst the eternal aether of the cosmos, last being of true power and magnitude who lay beyond the comprehension of our minds, beings that shape and warp the fabric of space, and distort the reality in which we live. To gaze upon their eyes is to gaze upon the eyes of infinity. To describe their figure is to describe the universe. To witness their power is to witness the power of the cosmos. I was only a young man when I was first stricken with the devilish fever that had previously claimed my family. I was to be considered lucky, as the great plague of bloodletting did not bring about my end. It was only the insanity and the fear of the cosmos that came with it that ailed me, and that insanity ails me to this day. To my kin, the true fever and pain of the plague would be their end. My mother was the first to go. She had sliced her wrists in a fit of hysteric madness while my sister and I were away at school. It was my father who found her, falling to her body in a futile struggle that some divine interaction would bring them back together. As it turned out, that divine interaction would simply be the contact of my mother's tainted blood. On that night, my father expired. The swelling of blood in his brain caused what at first believed to be delusions, visions of great cosmic and ethereal horrors. Fearing their awesome powers over the mind of man, he too took the blade, ending his life face down in a pool of plagued blood. My sister was awoken by the fit of the insanity and treaded barefoot in his room. But before the light of her candle could illuminate the void of the room, her feet felt the blood, and she knew. I was the only one to care for my sister, as we had no other family, having turned 14 a month prior. My sister was small and a frail child, who could be frightened merely by the sight of her own shadow. She did not last as long as mother or father, who fought the plague for nearly a week. My sister hardly lasted beyond the 3rd day, and a part of me wishes I never witnessed the 4th. I shall refrain from describing how my sister passed, as the brutality and the gore of it left me in such a fragile mind that I was admitted to the Providence Asylum of the Insane. It was there that I first began to experience the true nature of the universe and its unforgiving forces. As I mentioned, I was stricken with fits of madness and insanity, but not by the plague. If such were the case, I believe this manuscript would not be here to unleash the knowledge of horrors that hold it. It was during the first month of my admittance into the hospital that I met an artist by the name of Joseph B. Wilcox. I never learned the reason that Joseph too was admitted to the hospital, only that he felt the need to be there to protect someone, be it himself or family. He was a tall, skinny fellow, a neatly cut head of short brown hair, a pair of delicate blue eyes. His hands were soft and slender, like that of a woman, a clear sign that he preferred the intellectual arts of paint and clay, sculpting over the more physical and manual labors of other young men his age. We became quick friends, realizing that we were a much more stable bunch within the hospital. Joseph would tell stories of his life in a small village outside of Providence, whose name escapes my thought, and would often gift me small sketches of decorate drab. In the numbing room in which I'd stayed, I would tell stories of working in my family's shop behind the counter to help reach the jars of sweets that neither my mother or sister could reach, or of the kind old woman who would often came to purchase candles and soaps, and how she would always find my youthful exuberance a charming quality I should not let go of so easily. 'Twas the night of March 8th when Joseph entered my room, his footsteps slowed and monotonous as he crept to my bedside. I did not hear him enter. I only felt as he laid one of his feminine hands on my arm and shook me. When I was awake and seeing him standing over me, I shot up, frightened by the scarred and blood-stained face that stood before me. In his madness, Joseph had crafted a shiv from his bed frame and carved queer sigils along his face and arm. His eyes were bloodshot, and his mouth curled into a sinister smile. He placed the shiv on my lap and laid his hand on my shoulder, whispering some sort of terrible mantra into my ear. His hand drifted to the shiv, and he beckoned me to join him in a paradise lost a millennium ago. Blood drained from my face, and I felt my arm grow cold as I witnessed a wretched abyss manifest beyond him, and what seemed like that of which is beyond a normal world. A rush of hatred and anger overtook me as I plunged the shiv into his gut. The gargling and raspy voice of my once friend slowly faded as he fell limp on the molded and rotten floor. Fear overtook, as I was too terrified to remove my eyes from his body before me. When I finally broke the trance, and I looked up, the asylum of which I was confined had warped into a twisted vista of blackened skies and gray earth below me. Above the vast purgatory that I stood floated a being that still haunts me in my thoughts and memories of it, and maddens me in my dreams of it, swirling, churning, Gurgling and writhing like a mass of blackened earthworms and a rotting corpse was the Daemon Sultan who so repungently controlled the skies and cosmos as one. I was among a land of predators, and I was not worthy enough to even be thought of as prey. I felt as the frail of my mind shattered, my eyes rotting from the sight of such an eldritch terror that no man would ever know. The wardens found Joseph's body and the shiv under my cot, and there was no fighting that was already apparent. The horrors I witnessed remain with me in life, and when my body shall soon convulge in a noose placed around my wretched throat by the hangman, so too shall the horrors assault me in death. For earth is not our home. Our earth is merely an asylum of fragile-minded who are too weak to gaze upon the awesome terror and the powers of the universe.
I was adopted. I never knew my real mother. Rather, I knew her at one time, but I left her side when I was too little to be able to remember it. I love my adopted family, though. They were so kind to me. I lived in a warm and comfortable house and got to stay up pretty late. Let me tell you about my family real fast. First, there's my mother. I never call her mom or anything like that. I used to call her by her first name, Janice. She didn't mind at all, though. I called her that for so long, I didn't think she even noticed. Anyhow, she was a very kind woman. I think that she was the one who recommended my adoption in the first place. Sometimes I would lay my head against her in front of the television and she would tickle my back with her nails. She was one of those Hollywood mothers. And second, there's Dad. His real name is Richard, but he never really liked me much, so I began to refer to him as Dad in a desperate attempt to gain his affection. It didn't work. I think that no matter what I call him, he just would never love me as much as his own child. That's understandable, so I didn't really press the matter. The most notable attribute of Dad was his unmoving sternness. He was not afraid to pop his child when they did something wrong. I found that out before I could use the bathroom properly. He didn't hesitate to spank me. Well, I'm in line, and that's because of his methods. And lastly, there's my sister. Little Emily was really young when I was adopted, so we were about the same age, but she was slightly older. I like to think of her as my little sister, though. We got along better than any sibling could possibly get along. We would always stay up late together and just talk. Well, she did all the talking. I mostly just listened because I loved her. It was a great setup that we had. We were in short bedrooms because I didn't want to sleep in the living room by myself when I was smaller. I had a pallet set up for me next to her bed on the floor. This is where I've slept since. But it was cool with me because I enjoyed being with her, and I felt pretty protective of my little sis. Everything changed on a horrible Wednesday night. I was at home taking a nap when little Emily opened the front door. The sound of the door opening pulled me to a state of consciousness, and I walked from the room down the hallway to the living room. That's when I first remembered it was Wednesday. I was never good at keeping track of what day it was. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say it. My sense of time was horrible. Nevertheless, I knew it was Wednesday because Emily had just come home from church and her youth group gathering. She walked in the front door and hugged me, and then was followed in by Dad and Janice.
You have a good nap?
Janice said teasingly as she ruffled up my hair. I just shook my head and snorted in a manner that clearly expressed that I was teasing back with her.
"Don't snort at your mother like that,"
said my father, gruffly with authority. He shut the door behind him and hung his coat. I was clearly joking. I growled under my breath. He must not have heard me because I didn't feel him smack me. Emily then proceeded to our room and I followed. She started telling me about her day, usual teenage girl stuff, but I listened so that she would feel better. After her summary, she suggested watching TV, and I obliged and jumped onto the couch as she was going for the remote. She rolled her eyes at my little brother-like immaturity and scooted me over and sat down. The TV turned on and we watched it together until the sun went down. Emily was the kind of girl that, instead of watching cartoons and soap operas, she would rather watch Discovery and Animal Planet and National Geographic. I liked those too, so I didn't mind. Actually, those were the only channels that can hold my attention, to be honest. I laid there in the darkness with nothing but the thin ray of light from the street lamps outside to illuminate the room. It wasn't much. Time and time again, I could have sworn I heard a subtle sound just outside the window. A twig break, leaves crunching, clothing jostling, and all the while I could smell a faint stench of sweat and blood. I kept my eyes open most of the night. The sound outside subsided, and the smell left my nose. I began to feel at ease. My eyelids closed. Not long after that, I heard a very loud crash on the other side of the door outside. I was up in an instant. "There's someone in the house!" I barked with extreme adrenaline coursing through me. "Wake up!" I shrilly pleaded with Emily. She did, and as soon as I saw her sit up, I ran to my parents' room. Dad was dead. His neck was splayed open and gaping as blood spilled out of it off of the bed and onto the floor. I saw the master bedroom door was closed, and just before it, on the outside, was a man. A man, and I don't feel comfortable calling it that. He was very large and rugged. He turned around and saw me, and that's when I saw him accurately for the first time. I won't forget it. His eyes were large and beady and trapped with lust. He was styling a beard that was badly unkempt with blood dripping off of it. His clothes were dirty and his face was cold. Just then, I noticed the same horrid smell of sweat and blood from earlier, but this time it was overwhelming. He saw me. He saw me and grinned with a set of crooked yellow teeth. That smile threw me off. I thought that I was going to die, but then he turned back to the bathroom door, completely unperturbed by my presence. I was terrified, and I didn't know what to do. I just yelled and cried. I watched as he shouldered through the door that was my mom's only protection. I watched as he raised a large razor that he was carrying but obviously neglected to use properly. I watched as he sliced her open and tore her to shreds. And then I heard something, the last thing that I wanted to hear. It was Emily's scream coming from behind me. The large monstrosity looked up from my butchered mother and stared at my little sister. I was distraught. He stood up and quickly started walking towards us. My sis turned and ran, and I was at a loss when he bypassed me and went straight for her. Why was he still in the house? Had he not assessed the situation and run? Apparently not. And now, she was dead, and I was alone. I ran after them both. I expected the man to kill her as he did the rest of my family, but sadly mistaken. He grabbed her by the arm and jerked her as a way to make it clear that he was in control. He dragged her through the house, and I was making all the noise I could now, hoping and praying that someone would come by to my aid. He mustn't take her, not her. Please. As he passed me, I backed against the wall and whimpered in terror. Why? He didn't respond, except by putting his hand on my head, while Emily screamed in the other and saying,
Good boy.
He gave another crooked grin and a very cold, unnatural laugh. I followed him to the door where he dragged my helpless sister after him. He opened it, pulled her out, and slammed the door shut behind him. I am now sitting in the house with my mutilated, adopted parents, shivering and whimpering with dismay. He's out there with her, doing God knows what to her, and I can't do anything. I would if I could, but I can't. I would chase after them in a heartbeat, but I can't. I sit here looking at the door. I look down at my boss. If only I could open the door. Let me start this off by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of my dorm and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed that he just stopped caring. But one night, I saw him come on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he messaged me.
David, man, we need to talk.
That was when he told me about the No End House. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliche. Reach the final room of the building and win $500, 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently he had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck else addict. So I figured the drugs got the best of him and he wigged out at a paper ghost or something. He told me that it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. Why would I? I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 too good to be true. I had to. I set out the following night. This is what happened. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason sent chills crawling down your spine? I walked towards the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let a sigh of relief as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby, decorated for Halloween or something. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way, 8 more to follow. Reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door.
The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled a Halloween aisle of Kmart, complete with chic ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit, the only door beside the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spider webs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but bats hung from the ceiling and flew in circles. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled around and walked with a puff chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob and my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me for a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, and it cast a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows. Plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were others. I had barely walked in the room and I was already terrified. It was at that moment that I knew something wasn't right. I didn't think, as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking it as I progressed? There was no way. I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe. But I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it. Or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness. I couldn't move. I'm not afraid of the dark, and I never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sights had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know I was doing it, I would never have been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silent. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments. My rapid heart beating is the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. Wasn't even sure if there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly, but could barely see even my nose. I knew it was there, though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whatever was causing the noise was right in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what the thing had in store for me. When the lights flashed for less than a second, I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing, and I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness, and the hum was now a wild screech. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards away from the noise and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I'm not a drug addict. I've had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis short of my childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were only when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered the no-end house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back. Looking up at the ceiling, what I saw didn't scare me, it simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceiling in this room was taller than the others, which made me think it was the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various bushes and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room.
I almost assumed that whatever was back in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely bigger on the inside. But this was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there. However high up it was. I couldn't see any walls though. The only way I knew I was still inside was the floor. It matched the other rooms, the standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I would pass would reveal a door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly under my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin. At different places, I felt them crawling up and down my arms and legs. A few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, more of a whimper to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawling. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't seen the exit, so I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like an hour, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was just exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing trees on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it, the low hum from before. It was coming from the next room, and it was deeper. I could almost feel it inside my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert. The feeling of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way to make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6, and my hand shakily grabbing the knob. The hum was so loud I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum surrounded me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door I had shut was gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3. The same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one I came in through was now gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at that moment, I fell into what I now know was insanity. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. At first, I scratched softly. The wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob was. I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees. The only sound in the room was the incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there. The door was there. It was just... I knew it was there if I could just get past the wall.
Are you alright?
I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me, and what I saw was that spoke to me. And to this day, I regret ever turning around. The little girl was wearing a soft white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back, and white skin, and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw the young girl, but I also saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human, and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment, it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying. It was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room, but it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form, and when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak, I could barely even see. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I have been scared before in my life, but I had never been more scared than when I was trapped in the 4th room. But that was before room 6. I just stood there, staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped in here with it, and then it spoke again.
David, you should have listened.
When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl, but the other form spoke through my mind in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over into my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet couldn't take my eyes off of what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor and thought I'd passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of the battery-powered rats from the 2nd room. The house was toying with me, but for some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed. I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about that place again. I knew this room was hell. I wasn't ready to take up residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, the voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor and lifted myself up to all fours, and I turned to scan the wall behind me, and then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood, with a small dent chipped away in the center of it, and right in front of my eyes, I saw the large 7 I had almost mindlessly etched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond that wall, where room 5 was a moment ago. I don't know how I had done it, and maybe it's just my state of mind at the time, but I had created the door. I knew I had. In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most, an exit to the next room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both my hands on the large 7 in front of me, and I pushed. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me that this was the end, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it, but I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered. Just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time to dwell. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly. What I saw was a door. Not one that I'd scratched, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't. But if this was only 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed, and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but I was actually outside. My eyes stung, and I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I just went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving no in-house had faded, and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered my room, and there on my bed was my cat Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock as he had never acted like that. I thought, Whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I expected to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to my kitchen and made some food. I descended the stairs and turned into the family room. And what I saw would be forever burned into my mind. My parents were lying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads were placed on their chests facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling as though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in the family room. I didn't know what had happened. They didn't live with me at the time. I was a mess. And then I saw it. A door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be. But they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up. The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. Then the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to slowly make my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk, and the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed as though they were going to crumble. But still, the faces smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me, and I was now between the bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands clawed their way across the carpet towards me, all the while the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want to hear the voices to match those of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and the hands were now inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged towards the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me. Room 8. I was done. After what I just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of the no-end house. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of rooms 4 and 6. But sitting in the usual empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was David Williams. I walked closer. I had to get a better look, even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me, and I noticed tears in his eyes. Please don't do it. Please don't hurt me. What? I said. Who are you? I'm not gonna hurt you. Yes, you are. He was sobbing now. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me, and I don't want you to. He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually really pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. Listen, who are you? I was only a few feet from my doppelganger, and it was the weirdest experience, yet standing there talking to myself, I wasn't scared. But I would soon be. Why are you? You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to hurt me. Why are you saying this? Calm down, alright? Let's just try and figure this. And then I saw it. The David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt, embroidered with the number 9. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. Don't, please. You're going to hurt me. My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall, but by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents, but 9, this number was on a person, a living person. And worse still, it was on a person that looked exactly like me. David? I had to ask. Yes, you're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to the voice. 9. I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. And similarly to room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason I assumed that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and floors around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if there was anything below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To David, from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read the tag was something sinister. I wanted to throw up, and the last thing I wanted to do was remove that knife from under the chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions. Who put this here, and how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor, I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts for some reason turned to Peter, and whether or not he got this far, and if he did, if he met Peter Terry, sobbing in this very chair, rocking back and forth. I shook those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair, and immediately the other David went quiet. "David," he said in my voice, "what do you think you're going to do?" I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hands. "I'm going to get out of here." David was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly he got up from the chair and stood facing me. It was uncanny. His height, even though he stood, matched mine. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter. I didn't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it.
"Now,
His voice was slightly deeper than my own.
I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here."
I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still feel it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder, and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room, and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I had experienced up to that point. Room 3 was dark, but it didn't come close to what I was completely engulfed in. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark, and then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, and suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind, and I knew it wasn't real, but I'd seen it. And the mind has trouble differentiating between what was real and what wasn't. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days, the final room. And that's exactly what it was, the end. No End House had an end, and I had reached it. At that moment, I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all sense. I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was useless here, and I searched for taste in my mouth and found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. And then it happened. A light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. Then I felt ground come up from below me, and I was standing. After a moment or two, I gathered my thoughts and senses. I slowly walked towards that light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of a door, this time unmarked. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started, the lobby of No End House. It was exactly how I left it, still empty, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything that had happened that night, I was still wary of where I was. After a few moments of normalcy, I looked around the place trying to find anything different. On the desk there was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious, yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again handwritten. David Williams, congratulations. You have made it to the end of No End House. Please accept this prize as a token of your great achievement. Yours forever, Management. With the letter was 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked to my car, and I laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled into my driveway, and I laughed as I opened my front door to my house. And I laughed as I saw the small tin etched into the